Good morning. Could I ask you to take your seats, please? For those of you who are just joining us, who didn't make the breakfast session, welcome to the final day of the Canadian Science Policy Conference. It's been a fantastic conference so far. Lots of engaging discussions, both in the panel sessions and at the tables and at the receptions. This session this morning is a perennial favorite, a reaction to the fall budget. And the title of the session is, it's not there, but it is Meeting the Moment. And it is called Budget 2025, Meeting or Missing the Moment. We have a fantastic panel for you this morning. I'm the chair. I'm Alicia Main. I'm the Associate Vice President of Knowledge Mobilization and Innovation at Simon Fraser University in BC. And I'm delighted to be participating in this conversation with you today. I've also had the honor of sitting on the CCA expert panel on science and technology innovation that was released this week. And there's been a lot of good discussion about that. So the way that this session is going to work is we're first going to invite up two of our panelists that are Dave Waters and Shannon Story, who are from Global Advantage, and they are going to give a prepared analysis of Budget 2025 tailored for this community or for these communities around science, technology, and innovation ecosystems. And that'll take 20 minutes. And then we're going to invite the rest of our panelists, which are different stakeholders from our ecosystem, and you can see them up here, a very distinguished panel, that are going to react to that analysis and say yes and, or yes but, or no but. And so we aim to stimulate a vibrant discussion. And then we'll ask a few follow-up questions before it's your turn. So there'll be ample time for the audience to come up to one of the mics and ask a question of one of the panelists or of the whole panel and participate in the discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to call our first two panelists to the stage to give us their analysis of Budget 2025 and tell us whether it is meeting or missing the moment. Dave and Shannon, please join us.
Terrific. Thank you for that very kind introduction. We will perhaps try and identify our views on meeting or missing the moment, but it really is a question for the audience, for you to decide yourselves from your reflections on the budget. So the first thing about the presentation of this is there's a whole team, and you see them listed there, that actually worked to try and develop this analysis. This is an analysis that Global Advantage has done for a long, long period of time and presented at national kind of conferences like this in particular. One of the things, though, in terms of looking at the budget, Strong Canada, you'll notice a ship there, and a very interesting one. I'm an ex-commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard, and I looked at that and I wondered, oh, is that a Coast Guard ship? No, it is privately owned by a family in Montreal. The interesting thing, though, about this is the ship was in part financed by Samamoto Corporation and was constructed in Japan. When you look at the juxtaposition of Strong Canada, is this what we want? Actually building our ships abroad. We have a shipbuilding strategy. Now, I don't know whether this was designed. I doubt very, very much. But we need to reflect on that in terms of, well, what does it mean, Strong Canada, in terms of what are the objectives that we actually want. If I look at the issue of budgets are a funny thing. They're a combination of two things. First of all budgets are about the future. They're making a prediction. So it really is like you've got a crystal ball in front of you, and Minister Champagne has to look at what is happening in terms of global issues, and then how are we going to respond to these in the future? What are the investments that we want to make? The other interesting thing about a budget that we always need to keep in mind is we're using public money. And so the issue is, what are the public benefits that we're going to get from the investments that we're making? So I think those are two key issues are important to be able to keep in mind in looking at any particular budget. One of the things that I thought the budget did a very, very good job of, it starts off in the first chapter and it looks at, what are the global risks that we're trying to deal with? And basically those risks fall into these 5 different categories: economic, social, environmental, technological, and geopolitical. They're all interconnected, as we know from our experience with COVID-19, in terms of a virus in a wet market, and all of a sudden international travel is stopped. Then international trade is stopped. Families are locked in at home, not going to factories. You're changing supply systems. You're impacting the health system, the education system, and so on and so forth. So these risks are all interconnected. The budget, though, I think does a good job in terms of, looking at the economic risks. And I'm not going to go through them all. You're very much aware of them. The tariff issues, the trade disruption issues, the impact on communities, supply chains, the social risks, fragmentation, inequality that we're trying to deal with, global warming and all of its aspects, the whole issue of quantum and AI and what are the impacts on privacy and job losses and so on, and then the geopolitical risks, Trump, Russia, and China, and the implications of all of these. So I think the budget does a good job, but what it did, maybe it did too good a job in terms of the advanced preparation of Canadians in terms of how these risks integrate, because I think it set up an expectation then for something that really was much more transformative. Here is my friend at the top, expectations of budget 2025. I call him Leo the Lion. And being reflected in the mirror is a character I call, Lawrence the Kitten. And that is the actual kind of perception, I think, of many organizations in terms of budget 2025. In other words, there was a level of anxiety that was created, I think, across the population. In part, it's always interesting to note the kind of national impact of the Toronto Blue Jays and their almost successive run. But I mean, there was really I know in my community of about 200 people in Westmeath, there was a coming together and so on. And it was built then after all of the concern about the new Trumps and the impact that Trump impacts that we're going to have in terms of tariffs and so on and so forth. So a very, very high level of anxiety that may have contributed then to the kind of assessments that we've seen from so many organizations. To me, I actually think the one from the Globe and Mail editorial board was the most damaging. It was really, quite a significant, one of the most negative commentaries that I've heard. If we look at the issue of how big the budget is, yeah, it's big. It's bigger than the last 3 Trudeau budgets. What you see on this screen is actually the last 10 budgets in terms of the size. Obviously, the large ones, COVID-19 and budget 2021, were huge in terms of the expenditures. In my own view, I think actually the government got things pretty well right in terms of the amount of investment that was being made, but the implications of that we're still trying to unravel. And increases the deficit and increases the debt that Canada has. So although the budget is large here, and it does contribute to the deficit and GDP, kind of ratio increases, relative to other countries, Canada's not so bad. In other words, we have a little bit of fiscal flexibility here that I think is an asset that we need to look at carefully as we're trying to advance. One of the other things here is we put everything into 2 years. Budgets used to be only 2-year documents because you have a new budget every year. At one point, for political reasons, one wanted to kind of indicate things over 5 years because obviously it sounds better. But be careful about that. Those future year expenditures may not emerge. You have minority governments. You have a whole series of situations. Better look at the 2 years and then you annually adjust that. If I look at the issue then of meeting the moment, and I want to draw your attention to the red line here, going from the upper left-hand corner to the bottom. You have upstream investments focused on production, and I understand that. So new investments in housing, the major projects, infrastructure, defense capability, and so on and so forth. You also have 10 new funds, or in a couple of cases, it's refurbishing existing funds. And one of the challenges there is, are you going to make public servants into bankers? What experience do they have in terms of operating the kind of risk assessments you have to do in terms of these major funds? You have 12 new strategies that are identified, very, very significant ones in the budget. Apparently, there are about 75 new pieces of legislation that are going to be packed. So upstream, you've put all of this work and this effort and the commitments that you're making. From my point of view, though, it's public money. What are the benefits that you want to see downstream? And I think those are really on the consumption side, not on the production side. So what are the issues in terms of affordability of food, affordability of housing, the issues of security that we have, accessibility in terms of healthcare and education and employment opportunities, sustainability, obviously in terms of the energy transition, and social cohesion and equity. That's how you measure the performance of a budget. So part of the disconnect is, and I understand it, but you're focusing your energy in the upstream. How are you going to translate into downstream benefits that Canadians in their communities are going to feel? Affordability, yes. Here the issue to me is we're really zeroing on developing a housing industry. So that's the production side. But the issue is that has to be consumed. And the way it's consumed is by making a home for people. So when you look at the 4.8 million houses we want to build, the impact of that is on about up to 13 million Canadians. And that uses the StatsCan ratio. What's the size of an average kind of family? 2.9. So I understand the focus on building new homes, but you need to look at this in an integrated way. So how are those homes going to be connected to their communities? Are hospitals accessible? Employment accessible in those particular areas? Do you have transportation that is reasonable and effective? What about food and retail stores? Are they in the area? What are all of the implications in terms of the infrastructure that is needed? FCM had done a calculation in terms of the average price to connect to a home. And when you multiply that by the number of homes, that's $513 billion. Now, there are some measures in the budget that begin to address some aspects of this, but maybe not in the totality of the context that I'm describing here. It's not about the physical thing, the house, that is necessary. It's about ensuring it becomes a home for Canadians. The other element, of course, is, in Westmeath, we talk about this quite a bit. It's a small town near Pembroke, about 200 people, and a lot of them are in construction trades, and a lot of people are retiring. Like, who's going to build these homes and all of the services that are going to be required in relation to them? We hope there's a plan to be able to focus on this. This is something that I want to commend the Council of Canadian Canada. I think they did a stunning job in terms of the report that they just released this week. This is a scheme is showing the concept of the innovation ecosystem we have to deal with. The central feature there is something that is new, and it is civil society as the centerpiece. Now that means communities. It means us. It means the consumption side is the central way in which you judge the effectiveness of a system. I think that is extraordinarily important, and I want to give them credit in terms of injecting that into our discussion. Yeah, so here's talking about communities, one of the big issues that I'm really concerned about is youth. We have one of our ICI members, Max, here, and there are two others that are just exceptional individuals. We've started a youth kind of panel and discussion. We're thinking about a youth summit that we can lead to, and giving youth a much better voice in terms of discussions like this. There are significant investments in the budget, actually, in supporting youth in many areas, but not to get them jobs necessarily directly. So you've got the summer 100,000 in terms of summer. That is good. There's no question about that. But does it give them a permanent job? The youth mentorship, mental health issues, and so on, and support, yes, that will help them ultimately get jobs, but they need jobs today. 463,000 are unemployed. And when you look at the totality of these kinds of initiatives, yes, they're good. They amount to about 1.1% of the total budget, but youth are 12% of that population. And I'm just raising the question, are we doing enough to support youth? If I look at the community initiatives, then there are a whole range of really excellent initiatives. Women and gender equality in terms of a series of initiatives. Seniors, kind of like to see that. I have a particular focus in terms of disability kind of issues, which are there and I think are important. And then a large fund which supports a range of things, including universities, including hospital system, and then including infrastructure. But there isn't a clarity in terms of a number of the general kind of funds that are identified there. They are important, though, no question about it. And in terms of the last issue that I want to deal with, primarily on the social side before handing it over to Shannon on the more economic side, if I was talking to Mark Carney, I might say, you know, you have a new asset class. Bankers love to talk about asset classes. And to me, it is the 35,000 community corporations that are structured all across the country that know their communities extraordinarily well in terms of issues they're dealing with. Social issues, housing issues, culture and arts, environmental issues, equity issues, and so on. They have detailed knowledge of how you take a federal or provincial program and begin to implement it effectively into a community. I think it is a hidden gem that we need to understand better and we need to communicate better, and that all levels of government need to understand better and use more effectively in terms of the delivery of important services to them. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Shannon in terms of other aspects of the budget, more of the economic one. Shannon? Fantastic.
Thanks, Dave, for that overview. Really great to see you go through everything. So now I'm going to go over the economic side of things. So now as we zoom out and we look at the top 10 largest initiative, the picture becomes clearer. First, many of the biggest measures weren't new on budget day. They were announced a few weeks to a few months prior. That includes major industrial investments, housing commitments, and core defense spending. What the budget does here is formalize and scale them rather than introduce new fiscal strategy. $125 billion in initiatives are announced over the next 5 years. Almost half of that spending is dedicated to defense. Defense spending now defines the fiscal architecture of the budget. That puts Canada on a different trajectory and raises important questions. How much of this investment will translate into Canadian suppliers? How much will flow to foreign suppliers? And will this level of spending crowd out investments in competitiveness, productivity, research, and talent development? To set the stage, here we have our annual assessment of Canada's performance in research, development, and innovation. We update this analysis every year using OECD data, and the graph's now spanning 2 decades. What we're looking at here is GERD as a percentage of GDP, essentially how much of a country's economy is invested in research and development. In Canada's case, the number sits at 1.81%, while the OECD average is 2.70. The gap is significant. To meet the OECD average, Canada would need to invest an additional $26.1 billion annually. Does the budget sufficiently respond to the research and development and innovation gap? In fact, direct research and development spending drops sharply in the budget. The budget allocates $3.1 billion over 5 years for direct research and development and innovation initiatives. That represents a 62% decrease from budget 24. The largest single item in that total is the productivity super deduction, which is a set of enhanced tax incentive that lets businesses write off machinery, equipment, technology, patents, and related to scientific research and development. It would help accelerate private sector investment, but it depends heavily on assuming firms have the capital to invest. There's also funding for AI, but only $125 million of that is new money. The rest come from funds allocated in budget 24. Beyond these direct programs, there are several direct initiatives that will influence research development across the economy. The defense package includes investment in digital systems, advanced technologies, and supply chain renewal. For the Canadian Armed Forces, these are areas that often generate spillover for Canadian firms. The industrial strategy packages called Protecting Workers and Transforming Canada's Strategic Industries also includes programs that could support innovation. This includes the Strategic Response Fund, which remains one of the few large-scale research and development projects and industrial transformation. So while there are pockets of activity, their overall message remains clear. Direct R&D and innovation spending declines sharply, and indirect measures will only have an impact if they are coordinated into a broader national strategy. When we break the numbers down, the scale of investment in research and development is very clear. The total allocation for R&D over the next 2 years is $657 million. That represents about 1.5%. If we widen that lens to 5 years, it's $3.1 billion, which is about 3.4% of the $90 billion for 5 years. So while R&D is mentioned throughout the budget, the actual financial commitment is very modest, and this is why many observers say the budget doesn't face the scale of the competitiveness challenge Canada faces, especially given our long-standing R&D gap. Budget 25 allocates $1.7 billion over 13 years for higher ed, but when you look closely at the structure of these investments, some important gaps become clear. To start, colleges and institutes appear only once in the entire budget. None of the 1.7 appear to be directed to them. This is a major omission given the role colleges play in applied research, community innovation, workforce development, and regional economic growth. Building a strong country requires place-based innovation approaches that include colleges, not only universities. On the university research side, the granting councils were spared from the deeper government-wide reductions. They face a 2% cut rather than 15%, but their base budgets receive no inflationary protection. As costs rise 2 to 4% a year, the real purchasing power of the granting councils still falls. Moreover, Canada continues to underinvest into translation, commercialization, adoption, and the use of knowledge we already produce. The budget introduces the new talent attraction strategy with 4 new funds outlined on the slide. Taken together, the picture is mixed. The budget supports global talent attraction, but it overlooks the colleges and institutes that drive applied innovation. It avoids deep cuts to the grounding councils, but it does not strengthen the parts of the system that help transform research into value for communities and the economy. If we want to compete globally and deliver outcomes at home, we need research and innovation strategy that balances discovery with application and includes universities, colleges, and communities as full partners. Here we've highlighted Canada's global merchandise landscape. It points to a key structural vulnerability in our economy. We rely heavily on a single trading partner. The data here shows that our trade is not very diversified. 76% of our global merchandise exports go to the US. That's $591 billion in 24. This level of concentration creates a real exposure, especially at a time of trade tensions, tariff risks. When we look at the 25 monthly data, our exports to the US have already declined compared to previous years, and at the same time, exports to other countries such as China, the UK, and Japan have increased, which signals the early impacts of tariffs on our economy. Does the budget offer sufficient response to strengthen Canada's trade resilience and reduce our exposure to this level of concentration? While there is a significant set of measures designed to shield the economy from tariff pressures and broader global market instability, in total the package is around $2.3 billion. The largest component is a combined $11.9 billion investment over 5 years to protect workers and transform Canada's strategic industries. This includes targeted support such as industries such as agriculture, fish, seafood, forestry, $4.9 billion for workers, $4.5 billion to help companies grow and diversify in response to changing market conditions. There's also $1.2 billion dedicated to ensuring companies have access to financing. On top of this, the government is launching the new Buy Canadian policy to strengthen domestic procurement, aiming to make Canada less dependent on foreign supply chains and create more domestic demand for Canadian goods. There's also secondary measures expanding into trade, allowing companies to expand into new trade markets. To access those markets, the budget outlines around $4.4 billion over 5 years to help firms expand into more diversified trade markets. The largest part of this package is the new trade infrastructure strategy, which accounts for almost the entire investment profile at the bottom of this slide. This strategy supports major export-enabling infrastructure, such as ports, trade corridors, and transportation systems. Alongside infrastructure, several targeted programs are intended to help firms enter new markets, grow their global presence. These include backing for businesses, exploring new markets, increased food exporters, and initiatives to build business-to-business relationships in Europe. But scale matters. Canada exported 780 goods in 2024. Over 5 years, that's around $4 trillion. The investment of $4.4 billion shows that we invest $1 for every $1,000 of goods that we export globally. So while the direction of these measures is positive, the question is whether this level of investment is enough to make a meaningful shift in Canada's trade trajectory and reduce our long-standing exposure to a single dominant market. This budget is the largest defense and investment Canada has seen in decades. It commits $81.8 billion over 5 years to rebuild, rearm the Canadian Armed Forces. This includes major spending on personnel, infrastructure, digital systems, military capabilities, and the defense industrial strategy. The scale is significant. It delivers about 80% of the last defense total commitment, but compressed into 5 years instead of 20. It also moves Canada towards NATO's updated targets, including the path to 3.5% of GDP for core defense by 2035. But both an article by David Perry of CAGI and our analysis raised a few concerns. First, the budget provides no year-to-year plan showing how Canada will reach the 3.5%, which makes the long-term path unclear. Second, without major improvements to procurement, the system may not be able to turn this money into real capability quickly enough. There's also the domestic industry angle. The $6.6 billion defense industrial strategy and the new $70 million defense investment agency are intended to strengthen the Canadian supply chain. Whether they succeed will depend on how quickly programs can move through the system. So this is a historic investment, but it raises the same question we have asked across the budget. The dollars are significant, the challenge is execution. And that brings us to the way ahead. What does Canada need to do to the next to ensure that these investments across defense, the broader economy, actually deliver the outcomes Canadians expect? So this is the way ahead. That's it. Good. Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon and Dave, for that very thorough and engaging analysis. I am delighted to now invite the rest of our expert panel up to the stage to give reaction from their own stakeholder perspective. And I'm particularly grateful that we have on the panel this morning Parliamentary Secretary Karim Bardisi, who has the perhaps unenviable situation of having to respond to every stakeholder perspective. But we're really, really excited to have your perspectives. Please join us on the stage. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself and then be able to give a 3 to 4 minute reaction to that analysis. Anything that do you agree with the analysis of whether this budget meets or misses the moment? Anything that you heard that you would like to emphasize, or if there's something you didn't hear that you'd like to bring forward. And I am going to start directly beside Shannon, and I'm going to move down and just ask you each to introduce yourself and your stakeholder perspective first. Thank you.
Okay, is this on? Excellent. Thank you all so much for being here so early and for the honor of offering some perspectives from the many, many communities all across the country that all of you live in, that Tamarack Institute for Community Engagement represents. My name is Danya Pastuzik. I have to admit I am both a US citizen and a Canadian citizen, and actually see that as an asset. I think of myself as a weaver. I spend time in a rural community, but work primarily around the country. I'm often in urban places. I work with local communities and many, many people impacted by poverty and racism and other forms of oppression who are really feeling the current moment in disproportionate ways, and also with amazing people who lead systems. Tamarack is in many ways a technology organization, but not technology in the sense of AI and computers, technology in the sense of what's really needed to move this country forward in a good way. I would describe us as holding a couple of types of technology, and hopefully I'll have a chance to speak a bit more about them later. But we hold the technology of building and upholding democracy and public trust. We hold with the communities we work with all across the country, and I would say across the community sector, David, that you're such a good advocate for more broadly, the technology of innovation and learning from what's working in one place and spreading it to other places. We hold the technology of dot connecting so that investments can be aligned and made more efficient and effective. And we hold the technology that David mentioned of execution in communities. When I see this budget, are we going there next or just introducing ourselves? Okay. when I see this budget, I think first again of those that are feeling the stress of this moment most acutely. When I first read it, I thought about everyone who was reading it with zero balance bank accounts, with sparse fridges, with increasing credit card debt, with no designated primary healthcare providers, and with the really deep stress of how they were going to make their next rent payment or their next mortgage payment. David, you mentioned the focus on building things and the focus on physical infrastructure. The questions that came up for me, and then I'm going to follow those questions with a compelling future that they encourage me to imagine. The questions that came up for me around that were about, would we build the physical infrastructure that needs to accompany houses, but also, are we going to build things that just house and move people, or are we going to build things that return us to ways of being in community together? Are we going to address the crisis of loneliness and polarization through the things that we build? Are we going to build things in ways that engage communities they're meant to serve in planning out that work, in ways that leave people feeling more connected and more committed to their places and the people in it? And will the AI tools that we build do things like help municipalities to predict homelessness, to better optimize food security networks? And will we build those AI networks in ways that ensure that everyone has access, because we ensure everyone has broadband access and devices for connectivity? When I think about this budget's focus on builds, again, I like to imagine the future. You mentioned the future. The budget is a futuring tool. I imagine a future where federal dollars are going to low-interest financing and grants to community land trusts so that the benefits and the appreciation is being shared between homeowners and trusts, and where we're able to reinvent surplus into community amenities. I also notice that there's a lot of money being spent in this budget, not as much as, of course, during COVID, but as David pointed out, more than the government's past 3 years combined. So I wonder how this money is going to flow. David, you asked who's going to build, and I wonder, will the contracts go to local business and entrepreneurs with an emphasis on Black and racialized and Indigenous and female and rural-run businesses that have the most barriers to accessing capital? I wonder, will local communities hold stake in what's being built? And when I think about the size of this budget, I imagine a future where we are able to hear about the percentage of contracts that are going to local businesses, that are going to businesses led by equity-deserving groups. I imagine a possible future where we have capability building funds so that many, many different types of organizations can participate in the building. And I imagine a really good leverage of all the work that we've put into social finance the last years and where we're blending public and private funds to make things happen. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Can you hear me now? Yeah, perfect. That's wonderful, Danya. Thank you very much. And we'll pick up on some of those themes. I'd like to move now along to Robert to give us your introduction and reaction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it's okay with you, maybe I'd like to offer, I'm conscious of the order of precedence here, and maybe we could offer Parliamentary Secretary the chance to speak before me, if it's okay.
Of course.
Yeah, and I'll thank you, Robert. And thanks very much for this presentation, this opportunity to dig further into some of these matters that we spoke a bit about if you were at the plenary on Wednesday. And I know this conference has been lighting all kinds of fires in all kinds of different specific areas of interest that were referred to in the two presentations. So budgets have, I think, I'm going to speak a bit at the sort of macro policy level in Ontario. I worked on eight provincial budgets, including 4 as Director of Policy to Premiers McGuinty and Wynne. And this one, like all budgets, it has the narrative and it has the fundamental numbers. And the fundamental numbers don't shift as much as the narrative shifts. The fundamental numbers take time to shift because you're building on an existing base. The existing base that this budget was building on was a set of commitments that was made by the Prime Minister in the context of an economic rupture. And those commitments were to maintain and continue to build a strong social safety net by growing the economy more than it had been growing before. So as mentioned in previous panels, as you saw in some of the data, we have a long-standing productivity and challenge in Canada. That means fundamentally that government revenues to pay for the strong social safety net are not as large as they need to be over the long term if we are going to have and grow that strong social safety net. And so the way I talk about this sometimes is I say that our priority is to grow the strong economy we need for the strong social safety net we want and deserve. That's one overall piece of context. The other piece of context, though, is that the very pressing needs of Canadians right now across Canada, in every corner, are around affordability and housing availability and pricing as a subset of affordability needs. And so the story of this budget is the story of doing things that are going to, in a variety of places, GDP is a big global number, but to make a variety of policy choices that intentionally are GDP driving while maintaining while trying to make a dent in affordability and maintaining or growing the strong social safety net. Those are the three things that the budget is trying to solve at the same time. More specifically to research and development, therefore, the main overall budgetary theory and the main theory about those research and development investments that we've made, and I want to speak about what happened in 24 and 25 in a moment, is that those are, yes, beneficial to people's salaries. I saw the defense chart up there. A lot of the defense spending is on salaries. Some of our lowest paid public servants are actually people enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces. So yes, there's benefits to salaries. If you're a doctoral student here, you know how beneficial that can be. But it's really pointing towards the economic benefit. We speak about 5 investments we make in this budget. Housing, infrastructure, and you saw these on the charts, housing, infrastructure, defense, productivity, which are mostly on the tax side, not on the spending side, and then talent. And the main talent initiatives we've outlined already. So that is the overall intent of the budget. The numbers, the investment numbers in R&D in 24 and 25, yes, the growth of the amount of the increase in 25 was less than in 24, but the cumulative increase is still far surpassing what was available before, and is a major catch-up. Does it need further catch-up? Probably. Is that government's role entirely? I don't think so. I think some of the things, there's been some very good points made on the panel here about the kinds of other investments that are needed. But if you remember the Wednesday presentation, and David made an allusion to it earlier today, the CCA report, it's the other players in the economy who are underinvesting in relation to government in an OECD in a global context on some of those productivity enhancing investments that are related to innovation in particular. I will take the point about colleges as a good point. I think we've referred to in this room that there are not many college participants even in this room. And I'll just additionally say that the college, some things are the result of provincial public policy. And there was a lot of international student growth, in large part, not exclusively, but in large part because of provincial public policy choices around funding the college sector. That resulted in an overgrowth of that sector. And the federal government made a policy move to help that had the effect of pulling back on that. The federal government historically has not been that involved in the college sector, but it's something that we're hearing and obviously very interested in for all the reasons that have been named on this table. So those are a few comments.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Parliamentary Secretary Karim Bardisi. I understand that the Parliamentary Secretary needs to leave a little bit early, so we're going to continue throughout the panel, but we're going to pivot to having a few questions for you earlier than the end of the panel, so you get a chance to ask him something more there. So thank you for that. On to you, Robert.
Thank you. So my name is Robert Asselin. I'm the CEO of U15, Canada's leading research universities. What I will say up front is budgets are about numbers, but they're mostly about signals. And the signals in this budget for leading research universities, but universities in general, are very, very positive. They are substantive, they are significant, and they are forward-looking. If you think about different anchors in the budget, the talent piece is the most obvious one because it has visibility given the price tag. It basically anchors intellectual capital at the center of what this country needs to do going forward, which I think is very encouraging. So it's part of the vision, which I think is as important as the measure in itself. Then on research, you have to think about the circumstances we were in. Everybody was facing potentially 15% cuts. The fact that it's 2%, it's mostly symbolic. I will remind this audience that the only institutions that had 2%, other than the granting councils, were the RCMP, Defense, and Indigenous. So I think that speaks for itself about how the government sees research as a central lever for what we're trying to accomplish going forward. On sovereign capabilities, it's the beginning of a new chapter. The Defense Industrial Strategy will be presented, as understand it, before Christmas. We'll know more about how research fits into this piece. But I will say what was in the budget was also promising, given the focus, for example, on quantum technologies, on sovereign capabilities, research. So I would say for us, we have to think strategically about the anchors going forward, and the anchors are there. And compared to where we were even maybe 6 months ago, I would say it's a very positive development from my perspective. Now, the analysis was a bit critical, I thought, because it presumes that every budget will solve every problem. And having been a budget director in the finance minister's office, I can tell you this is not possible. It takes many, many budgets to solve things. And what I would urge you to focus on is the direction. And the direction is good. We have to keep going. There's a lot more to do, but I think it's very encouraging from my perspective. The last thing I will say is not everything is about money. There's a lot of work to be done on science, technology, architecture. I think it's a theme in this conference, and it should be a very important theme for this group to think about how we achieve the next iteration of our innovation policy. What's our science, technology, national strategy going forward? Are we going to translate research, intellectual capital into economic outcomes? That, I agree, requires a lot of work. I think, again, sovereign capabilities, national security agenda of the government is promising that way. There's architectural piece there that deserve our attention and that we can work towards making this more deliberate going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And that is a fantastic segue over to Laurent, speaking for the Council of Canadian Innovators.
Yes, hello. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Kareem. Thanks, everyone. There's a lot to pick up on here, so I'm going to try and keep myself very disciplined about time. My name is Laurent Carpenter. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Council of Canadian Innovators. For those of you who don't know us, we're an organization that represents 175 of Canadian headquartered scaling technology companies. And really what we focus on is barriers to scale. What are the things that are keeping Canadian scale-up success stories from becoming something you read about more often? And the way we think about it is there's access to talent, access to capital, access to customers, and then marketplace frameworks. Robert, I think, just did a really good job talking a little bit about the talent outlook, and I think there's a lot to be positive about. Shannon, you said something during your presentation that really stuck with me, which is that the execution matters. And I'm not that old, but I feel like I've been hearing that for a long time. And I definitely agree that if we're looking at this budget, that tends to be, I think, perhaps my lingering concern. I think if you're looking at kind of the broad economic statement in this budget, it's that Canada should make more of what it sells and sell more of it. Which is great. I think that's good. That's an economics of addition, and frankly, enough lines have been going in the wrong direction that an economics of addition versus subtraction, I think, is an improvement. That said, you look across at the OECD and the rest of the rich advanced world, you see that the vast majority of productivity growth in Canada has been flatlined to negative for most of the last decade at this point. It's coming from leading edge firms at the technological frontier. And if we don't grow those firms in Canada, then we're going to be struggling for a very long time. So I take all the points about, I think also back to a year ago today. We're November 21st? A year ago today, Joe Biden was president. or if was still president, Donald Trump had just been elected, and we were all thinking that Pierre Poilievre would be prime minister within 4 or 5 months. So a lot has happened, and I think governments have to take the hands they're dealt and deal with very challenging global circumstances, and we all accept that. But that said, I think do we have here the ingredients to really change the trajectory on those issues? I don't know. Time will tell. As Shannon said, execution matters, and I'm left pondering a lot of the execution details coming out of this budget. To take one example, the defense industrial strategy, I think could be potentially quite transformative if it's leveraged the right way. I think we'll have to see. I think the Buy Canadian policy similarly. We will have to see, for instance, what is a Canadian company for the purposes of buying Canadian? Are we going to be doing the same way, but with a maple leaf next to the large international conglomerate? I think that would be a mistake, but we will see what happens there. So overall, I think there's definitely some reasons for optimism. I think I don't want to be super down on this, but I do think we've been hearing execution matters, and things take time for quite a while now. And I'll take my CCI hat off for a quick moment and say I had a book out earlier this year, kind of looking at the history of Canadian industrial policy. And it's fairly sobering reading, 50, 60-year-old Economic Council of Canada documents that identify the exact same problems with the exact same recommendations. And you're left to shake your head a little bit about, Robert talked about architecture. Our struggles to build the architecture to do these things well in this country has been really profound and still ongoing. So I think, I don't want to be, like I said, I don't want to be too negative, but I do think there's a lot of work to do. And I think the history of waiting on execution for me thus far has been left me wanting more, which is a good place to leave people with presentations and budgets. So I'll stop there. But I think there's a lot to do, and looking forward to doing more of it.
Thank you for that, Laurent. I think that innovation ecosystem architecture and innovation policy is a topic near and dear to many people here, and one that we may pick up on later in the discussion. But I'd like to pass it over next to Victoria Lennox to speak on behalf of the Women's Enterprise Organizations of Canada.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. And I think as we come down the line of the panel, there's a lot of alignment with regards to translating all of those investments into tangible impact for Canadians and how we engage the various sectors in order to build capacity vis-a-vis this opportunity that we have. Just to respond quickly, directly to Shannon and Dave's presentation, certainly agree wholeheartedly with the focus now what? Now what is the translation of the budget into tangible impact for, in particular, from my vantage point, entrepreneurs, small businesses, high growth companies, and in particular, women entrepreneurs who are disproportionately impacted by this shift into major critical sectors where they might not be running their companies. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. Also, agree with the commentary around the nonprofit sector and civil society. Civil society anchoring an entire economy around the kind of downstream outputs for that community makes also a lot of political sense too. So it creates a lot of alignment for the government to really focus there and align industry and all other sectors around it. So it was really nice to see that model, and hopefully that can be communicated to policymakers as a new paradigm with how we build our country. So that was very nice to see, as well as the importance of the nonprofit sector and building capacity in the nonprofit sector to more effectively collaborate across sectors, but also to become more sustainable in and of themselves through social innovation models that don't require handouts from the government and create real value add for the community. So it's really about sustainability in all of those respects. So those are my initial comments there. And then a few comments just generally with kind of hat on and hat off, because I'm brand new to my role at the Women's Enterprise Organizations of Canada. So my perspective is that of having built a national charity in the United Kingdom at colleges and universities, fostering student entrepreneurship, having been the founder of Startup Canada, Canada's national organization to create an entrepreneurial culture, having worked with Indigenous economic development the last 5 years and being a big part of the deployment of the Indigenous economic strategy. And now with my new hat at the Women Enterprise Organization at a critical time where women's rights globally are being retracted. On my way to the conference today, my Uber driver drove right past the famous 5 Memorial. And whenever I go by the famous 5 Memorial, I think about the responsibility that we have to ensure the equality of women and reaching parity in every investment in the economy. And when I looked at the budget, I kind of looked at it with a bit of a different lens. I looked at it with regards to, okay, great, we had a women entrepreneurship strategy, a women enterprise strategy. We built an ecosystem, we fixed some funding gaps. Now what? Well, that program has now been sunsetted. And so what has taken its place is very interesting. We have now ongoing funding, permanent funding to wage. And that's wonderful. That protects women across Canada with a focus on our epidemic of domestic violence. So, and we're moving the needle on mental health and some of the key social issues that our women are facing. However, entrepreneurship provides a vehicle and a way out of difficult circumstances, so women can start companies and grow our economy, and women are doing that. They're taking advantage of that. But we're also having a high growth barrier where women who reach a certain level of their business, accessing systems, venture capital, access to markets, etc. So I'll just conclude with a few quick comments on the budget, just because we have our parliamentary secretary here. So parliamentary secretary, just a few notes, if I may. With regards to wage, we now are looking at all of our policies from a gender-based plus analysis. This is wonderful, but we're not actually tracking any KPIs. We don't actually have any targets. So we're analyzing our policies according to this new lens, but the lens is insufficient without actual targets and measurement and transparency and accountability. So in addition to that, we need to ensure that all of that is implemented across the critical sector investments, and that women are fully part of the CAN export expenditures and venture capital, that we're part of the Buy Canada program, and that in addition to that, we are part of this set-aside, that as part of the Buy Canada program, just as Indigenous entrepreneurs in Canada have a 5% allocation, we'd like to see a set-aside for women entrepreneurs as well. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to comment on Shannon and Dave's presentation, and hopefully the perspective of women entrepreneurs. We can't build a strong Canadian economy with one hand tied behind our back. We need all of us working together.
Thank you, Victoria, for those very compelling remarks. So we've now heard an introductory remarks from each of the speakers and their reaction both to the budget from their stakeholder perspective and to the analysis that we saw this morning. I'd like to first invite Parliamentary Secretary Bardizzi to react to some of the other perspectives that you've heard on the panel, and maybe particularly the women entrepreneur perspective, but that theme of metrics, KPIs, and execution. And maybe you could give us, along with your reaction, a little bit of insight into how the government is intending to try to move forward from this budget and look at intermediate metrics or KPIs.
Yeah, thank you. The defense industrial strategy has been mentioned a couple times already, and the defense spending has been indicated up there. It is the largest growth in new spending, and our committee at the Standing Committee on Industry is doing a study on the defense industrial strategy, and the women's perspective on that strategy and the opportunities for women and women businesses, women researchers to benefit from that strategy is not something that is a given. In fact, the gravitational pull of that sector, as in a lot of industrial sectors, is that it's harder for women to participate in those sectors. And so that's something that we as a committee have been very engaged on. Every witness who comes to that committee, I or one of my colleagues on the Liberal side anyway asks about, well, what are the opportunities for women to participate in the defense industrial strategy that's coming together? What are the procurement opportunities? What are the small and medium-sized business opportunities? Because we know, and in particular in that sector, it's very much dominated by very large businesses that then flow contracts down. And so I think that's thank you. I think that's a very important perspective to bring here. One of the programs that we fund is called Futurepreneur, the Government of Canada funds, which is focused on a variety of new business owners, more younger, And there's a place in my riding called Parkdale Pottery. It's a woman who had a completely different career, and then she decided she wanted to start a small pottery studio. And to the points made elsewhere in the panel about local connectivity and how it's, the federal government is working at this 30,000 feet or 50,000 feet, or, Space Canada, International Space Station, many hundreds and thousands of kilometers. And how do we have a relevance locally, and to these local economies, to this local kind of economic resilience? And Parkdale Pottery Studio is a perfect example of that. It's a no interest loan funded through business development with a copay of Business Development Bank of Canada, and allowed this woman entrepreneur who had another career to go off. Now, she's probably not going to join Canadian Council of Innovators. She's deploying a technology, an oven, kilns. It's a very old technology, but she's bringing her design sensibility. She's playing this role in this very important local economy in Parkdale, which, if you know, Toronto is a poorer part of the riding, of the community. And so policy at its best can reach from way up to way down. Actually, one of the other departments that was protected was women and gender equality, although as Victoria is saying, some programs were enhanced and others were not or may not be renewed. So that's one set of comments on those presentations. I think the other thing I'll just say is Robert spoke about the direction of budgets, and you saw a direction, and you saw in Shannon's charts the kind of the outsized role in relation to the rest of the spend on the tax side for productivity and some other forms of investments in the tax system. The totality of those investments are actually, I'm very excited by the direction of that. It's very much about our clean electricity future. There's clean technology tax credits. There are a variety of vehicles that we hope will incent investment. Our measurement, and we should be held to account for this, our assessment is that we will attract $500 billion in new investment to Canada over the next 5 years in the budget. That's the big global number. And there's work to be done to see how that plays out in a number of different sectors and places. I think that it is going towards the kinds of economy that Laurent identified. And some of that is, yes, implementation. Yes, we have to get the rules of the tax credit right. Yes, we have to get the design of the talent, the international talent recruitment program done right and quickly. But then there are other pieces that we think about other forms of investment, and it's everything from pension fund and the big bank investment. I'll note parenthetically for those who care about competition policy that the Competition Bureau is doing a study on big bank lending to small and medium-sized businesses, because there may be an issue there. But it's everything from those kinds of pools of institutional capital to the kinds of conditions that we can create that allow a woman entrepreneur who's got a business idea to get a bit more capital and to be able to take the risk to do something that will be beneficial for her community.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I do think that I'm going to ask people to come to the microphone with their questions while we start to ask one more question here, simply because Parliamentary Secretary Berdizzi has a very busy agenda, and he's going to have to leave the panel a little bit early. So I want to give you a chance to direct some questions to him, and you'll have a little bit more time for the rest of the panel. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about both the incentives from the tax incentives, which are excellent, for that mixing from towards execution of our strategy. There's also been a lot of discussion at this conference about direct investment, and you mentioned the pension funds, which in an excellent way. But there has been a lot of discussion about how Canada's a bit of an outlier in our international comparators with indirect versus direct support for R&D. And I wonder if you could comment briefly on that while we have people coming up for questions, just on how the government's thinking.
And so the charts in that CCA report also reflected that historically the tax system was used as more of a vehicle for innovation-driven investments, and that we had fallen behind in particular on research funding, and that's why the the major choice in 2024, which was sustained, as Robert pointed out. There's what you call stock and flow. Government budgets affect the flow, but the stock is the stock. We're not, and so one thing, and this is where both David and Shannon in different ways reflected to budgets at moments in time, and to completely transform a government's budget is ill-advised. You would not want that. Because of the disruption to the programs that you're benefiting from, and whenever one program ends, there's a discussion, just to lift the veil a little bit, on how these processes work. Whenever a minister decides or proposes to not renew a program, there are major discussions when that happens, and there are major considerations about, well, what are other related programs that are available, or what are other ways that we can achieve the same policy objective? Or, you know what, that program did not achieve the policy objectives that it meant to achieve, so we're just going to, we're not going to do that program anymore, but we're going to do some other things. So there's probably an academic discussion about whether indirect or direct, what the proportion of indirect versus direct support for research and development ought to be. In the world of this, this is what we have and this is where we want to go. We think we've made some correct moves, but we're always open to feedback around that. I will just add finally that the indirect supports that we are building are now quite significant in number and in potential scale, with the reforms to SHRED and others. And so we in turn will be looking for information on getting on the results of those, which is a bit downstream. Those when you have an indirect support, when it's taken up by, when you're government, you send out money and you know that there's going to be a given amount sent out. But when it's an indirect support, you are in a sense waiting for the response from those other investors who need to take up that support. Wonderful,
thank you. So we're now going to turn to the audience, and we'll come back to, and you can direct your question to anybody on the panel. And please introduce yourself and in your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Marc Nantel. I'm the Vice President of Research at Niagara College. And thank you for a lovely panel, and I love the analysis. Parliament Secretary Bardizzi, thanks for your service. I always thank everybody who runs for or holds position, because honestly, it's not a job that I do, so well done. This being said, I don't know where to start. Listen, it's probably important to understand that college applied research is there to help communities and small, medium enterprises mostly to flourish. Much more so than anything else at a college. None of the funding that we get from FedDev or the other RDAs or NSERC or whatever sticks at the college. They're all in-out funds. We have to spend all of them on the projects. So I would recommend not linking colleges' entrepreneurial spirits because they're not very well funded by their province and therefore went and got a lot of international students with the plight of the applied research world at colleges. Please do not punish applied research at colleges because of what the perception was an influx of international students beyond what you may have liked. Also, all of these visas were issued by the federal government.
Thank you for that. We'll leave it for that and for a response, please.
Yeah. And very smart to get up to the microphone first for the second panel in a row I'm on. So I'm going to be really fast because I see the 4 other folks. And I'll just say, I don't make that link, and I agree that this is an issue that needs attention.
Thank you. I'm my colleague, Sarah Lubick.
Thank you so much. This was a very insightful panel and very imaginative. And before I ask my question, I just wanted to double down on what Dana said and what Victoria said around keeping in mind who gets to participate. I think that's incredibly important, and to maybe make a note that I'm so glad to hear that people in Parliament are saying and asking questions about who is getting to participate. but I would advocate for putting numbers to that, because you do get what you measure, and that gives us a North Star and also allows us to hold people to account. So it's a big picture question, so anyone can answer it who's interested. But one of the things that I've loved from this conference has been the talk of collaboration and imagining what we can do together. And so my question to everyone would be, how would you like to see this budget implemented in such a way that it doesn't create silos and doesn't end up creating competition? Because so often budget items end up in a competition that fragments us further.
Thank you. Who would like on the panel to respond to that? About fragmentation versus collaboration. Yes, please, Victoria.
Yes, like what I would love to see is for the government to use its convening power to convene the ecosystem and exactly not to have us compete against each other, as you said, that further fragments and duplicates and wastes taxpayer dollars and all of the things. And in particular, with this new organization that I'm part of, it's called the Women's Enterprise Organization of Canada. And there's similar organizations like this, but it's like a national organization that has regional organizations. So Women Entrepreneurs BC, Alberta, Manitoba, etc. And they're all going to be funded through their regional development agencies with this new budget strategy. There isn't a national coordination initiative or measurement or anything like that. That at least is in the budget, although it'll work itself out in translation. So I think my ask would definitely be to use the power to convene us and to use us to help to solution how we are going to translate these big goals we have as a nation into real impact in communities. So just work with us and walk together.
Great, and we have two other quick answers here. I'm going to ask Danya first, and then Kareem.
I'll be quick. I find myself these days coaching 10-year-old boys playing basketball. And what I notice is that the teams that win have a shared goal, and they're also really clear on everyone's role on the court. Our team never wins. But I think I think it applies here. I think what we learn locally on a basketball court or in communities really applies here. We all need to hold the mindset that everyone has something critical to offer. We all need to hold the mindset of a shared measurable result and disaggregation within that about which groups we're going to focus on most in achieving that result. Then we all need to get clear on what we can each contribute to that result. But I find that when we have different goals, we move in different directions. So the shared goal, the sense of what we can each do to get there, and then Parliamentary Minister, going back to what you said about it can't just be one sector. We need all sectors participating. We need all levels of government participating. We need cross-scale alignment and cross-sector alignment to make it work. That'll be really important.
And then I'll give the final word on that question to Parliamentary Secretary Bardizzi, who then would need to leave us, and we will continue on with our questions.
So what is in the question is true of within government. And I've shared, I think, in a different room of university presidents, the observation that government does not organize itself to be to share information within itself about what is happening in the university sector or in the college sector or in the post-secondary sector, which are all somewhat, they're all somewhat different kinds of conversations. That's something I've observed since I got there. So we need to do that work. And the other thing I'll say, and I think, this is an area where it's an interesting situation for stakeholder associations and for leaders of their fields. So when it comes to the talent strategy, this is a signature investment of this budget when there were other choices available. Other ministers wanted other things. And this was a signature choice, signature investment. Are there things around it that are going to be, not yet resolved? Are there implementation concerns? Sure. But one of the pieces of advice I would have is that stakeholder associations that see their future as somewhat being benefited from that strategy should be positive about it. And that the people who are leaders within the fields who are not stakeholder association groups, but rather people who have an influence, share your connection to this idea. I was an international student once, and when I came to Canada, and I worked under a chair. Well, we're going to have more of those chairs now. That's great. So there are more people like you downstream who are going to be able to benefit. I'll share one little other story about this, because a little thing I kind of knew in the back of my head, but it's something I'll say from the stage, which may make two of the granting councils uncomfortable if they're in the room. NSERC has an undergraduate research fellowship kind of program, and the other two granting councils don't. And sure, okay, come and tell the federal government to pay for those. But if we're going to light the fire of research and interest, then we have to reach deep into community, as we heard on Wednesday night at the gala with some of those trailblazers and the way they're reaching deep into community. And it's not just in undergraduate students, it's actually before that. But we have to do work, the collaborative work that I see that I'm, like in my parliamentary secretary role in this space, that I'm kind of excited about. And again, there is a bit of a federal government role for it, although it's provincial governments, it's communities, it's school boards. It's to reach deeper into community, reach deeper into universities, colleges at the undergraduate or diploma level, and into high schools, and to invite them into the research enterprise. That is, I think, an overall collaborative piece of work that we can all do in our personal lives, in our policymaking worlds, in the mentorship. If there's anything we're going to do to solve the big challenges around Canada being a place that we're proud of and is prosperous and sovereign and free, then we need to be tapping into that talent that is going to be creating these, answering the problems, finding the solutions, and creating the prosperity that allows us to be sovereign and free. And that in turn means taking the work and the kinds of things that are talked about here and reaching much more deep into younger people than we've done before.
Well, thank you, Parliamentary Secretary Bardizzi. I think we'll offer him a round of applause and thank you for that. We know you have to get on to other meetings, but we wanted to say how grateful we were that you joined us. We're hearing a lot of sentiment that the budget 2025 is meeting the moment, but we also, you can clearly hear there's a lot of suggestions of how to implement it, and we'll get back to you with more of those suggestions. Thank you so much.
Alicia, my question was for Bardizzi, Parliamentary Secretary Bardizzi, so I will not ask it here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I missed you there, Jeff. Yes, please, to the next. Oh, actually, you know what? I should go to this mic. Sorry, I didn't see you here. Please.
All right. Well, maybe Bardizzi will hear my question at least. My name is Lee Paulseth. I work at Toronto Metropolitan University, and I work with youth primarily. And so one thing that I'm seeing missing from the discussion this morning that cuts across all of the themes is climate. And Canada is not on track to meet our climate commitments. This budget moves us farther away from that. And if we're talking about community-based work, the budget is looking to invest in oil and gas sectors where communities are not consenting to those projects, and where frontline communities will be further impacted by climate catastrophe. So I'm wondering, perhaps some of the folks on the panel can speak to, how are we going to protect communities? How are we going to protect folks who are most affected by climate through this budget?
Thank you for that question. Is there anyone on the panel who feels that they can step to that? Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I'd like to start. First of all, I think your observation is completely accurate. I mean, there's been a regression in terms of and you can see this in terms of the COP discussions taking place right now, internationally and domestically, in terms of climate change. I actually think that is the biggest threat that future generations are going to face, in my view. And I think it's unfortunate that constellation of issues, including political issues, don't permit us to advance further. The second part of your point, so you've got mitigation, and we're not going to meet those targets. I mean, so you got to look at adaptation, and that means adaptation in terms of the impact on communities. And I think that's where we have to help them become more resilient. So again, I think the focus we need is, the wildfires, the floods, all of these kind of issues that communities are facing right now, and how can we strengthen and provide more infrastructure and resilience for them to survive what I think is going to become inevitable.
Thank you for that. We have another question at our other mic here, please.
Hi, thank you. It's Matt McLeod from the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada. Another element I find has been missing from these discussions when we talk about direct and indirect spending and the slide decks on spending. Yes, okay, maybe the Tri-Council was exempted and only given the 2% target. Other departments who conduct research in the government are not. If you look in the budget, at agriculture, there's cuts to climate-related research. There's cuts to libraries and parks, if you know anyone in health or the Public Health Agency who are experiencing cuts right now. And in the CCA report, it does say, yeah, we have dropped it by about half compared to the OECD average for federally conducted research. And when I look at the panels here, I don't see a lot of discussion about that. So I'm just wondering where people see the future of government conducted research, which is direct spending we know will happen in Canada, how that fits into the budget. Thank you.
Is there a member in the panel who would like to respond to that?
Sure, I can.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, happy to. I think that's a good point. And I think, frankly, intramural research is a piece of the research architecture that doesn't get talked about a lot. I think last I checked, it was about $3 billion a year, which is not small when you consider the granting councils overall are not a whole ton more than that. I think, you talk to some of our companies that work in perhaps the natural resources spaces, agriculture. There's a good culture there in some of those places of turning public benefit research into broader commercial and social benefit for Canada. I think perhaps a more considered and directed approach in that vein might be a good thing for intramural research. I think there's a place for, public spirit, open science. But I think as well, if we're running these national labs, you look at the example of the US. The US has turned for a long time public research into really considerable private and public benefit by turning it into commercial products and services that are then spun out and companies built around them. So that's a place where I think we can do better, frankly. And it's a place where we should do better. I think the model has not necessarily been serving Canada well as it currently operates. So I would like to see more attention paid to that and more thought given to how we can better leverage the great work that federal scientists currently do for national benefit.
Wonderful. One last question, and then I'm going to ask all of the panelists to give us their final assessment and recommendation. So Rahim, please to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Rahim Rizai. I'm with the Institute for Collaborative Innovation with Disclosure. I work with David. Dave started by talking about the budgets are about the future. I think the budgets are largely also about the values. Dania talked about imagining a future world, in her world, what this budget might do or may not do. I imagine a world where, how does this budget fit within the global sphere? How do we look from the outside world with this budget? And I want to speak about a constituency that nobody really represents, it seems. That's the foreign aid budget in Canada. About 50 years ago, our Prime Minister set a global target of 0.7% GNI for foreign aid. Canada's never met that. The best we've done was about 50%. This budget cost our foreign aid by $2.7 billion, while at the same time it invests tremendously on defense. To be honest, if this trajectory continues, it's not the country that I really aspire. I don't think we should aspire to be. I've done a tremendous amount of work, research around the world. We have a compassionate image in the world. We have a kind image in the world. The image of investing tremendously in guns while we cut back on the poorest of the poor, I think doesn't reflect very good on us. It's too bad that the deputy minister left. I wish he had heard this message, but I hope we can relay that to our government, that this is not the trajectory we want to go. I don't know if anybody cares to comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will give further feedback back in the summary from these sessions. Does anyone on the panel want to be able to respond to that observation of our foreign aid versus defense spending? Dave?
I started my career in government in 1972 for the Canadian International Development Agency. And one of the things that I did learn was from other countries, in particular the Scandinavian countries, is the leadership role that they took. So I mentioned that in terms of our fiscal capability, I think we have some flexibility. We've done very well internationally in terms of that. To me, Canada needs to lead in so many areas of challenges that other countries are facing. And I don't see that kind of external ambition at this point. In a sense, as I'm trying to argue, we're focused upstream. It's going to take, developing a mine, they take 10, 12 years, to develop. First of all, our populations are feeling issues urgently now, and so are other countries. So I think to the point that I think is being made, that is part of the character that we have. We're an extraordinarily wealthy country in so many ways, but that means we also have a responsibility, and I think we can't forget that.
Thank you for that, Dave. Now I'm going to ask all of the panelists, starting this time with Victoria, coming down the line, to just give a final reflection. Is the budget 2025 meeting the moment, yes or no? And one recommendation that you would like to be taken forward by the government.
Overall,
or by this community.
Yes, absolutely. So overall, I feel, given the global context and just from the vantage of the whole entrepreneurship ecosystem, right, from startups and social innovators all to our high growth companies, I do find the budget to be meeting the moment as best as it can and providing a pragmatic approach for Canada. But my one ask and recommendation for the government is to remain committed to the values of equality and full participation of all people in the growth of our country, and to continue to share the message that things aren't equal. Systems are biased, and we need to continue to innovate and include, and that inclusion matters. So yes, that would be my recommendation, that we need to be measuring and pushing for more inclusion, because that's going to be our strategy for growth. Diversity is our strategy for success.
Thank you, Victoria. Laurent, to you.
So the audience can't see it right now, but there's a little yellow light next to our timer. And the yellow light, I think, captures pretty well, I think, how I'm feeling about the budget. And it's a good visual metaphor. Yeah, listen, I talked about execution mattering, and I think that's really precisely where I'm at. I think there's a lot of good, commitments, a lot of open doors on a lot of promises here, but I think we just need to see someone at the door and have it be answered. And I think it would be wise for the government to work with stakeholders, including industry, including the post-secondary sector, including the social economy, to really make sure that we have something that's designed deliberately to last, that gets the architecture questions right, because that's historically been the big gap in this country. And I hope that this will be an opportunity to move past that.
I would just end by a bit of trying to inject a bit of realism and then hope going forward. The realism piece is this government objectively has been in office for about 6 months and iterated more or less a structural deficit of about 50 to 60 billion, depending on how you look at it. No economic growth, lots of uncertainty given the Trump situation, no productivity, that's been an ongoing problem, and very difficult trade-offs going forward. And so in those circumstances, my argument to you is I think it did pretty well in setting a new direction on where we need to go. And on the hope side, what I will say is collectively, this is our Sputnik moment. This is a crisis of sovereignty, of self-affirmation for Canada. How we respond in the next few years will shape this country going forward. And I would hope that science technology is at the core of this vision going forward. I'm optimistic it will be, but it's our responsibility, and this is why you're attending this conference, that it remains so, that we execute on it. Thank you.
Thank you for that call for action, Robert. Danya, to you, please.
I'm going to take up the invitation to suggest what we might do as a community. I spoke earlier about the technology of Tamarack and others in the social economy, sort of in the community sector, and part of that technology is starting with self. we have we're gifted with a lot of power and a lot of opportunity in this room. And my call to action is let's keep dreaming, let's keep imagining. We are where we are. And I think the best thing we can do is look forward to the future that we want to leave for our kids and that we want to have for ourselves over the decades ahead. And then align with the people who hold that same goal with us. Let's do this work together. Let's hold empathy for one another across sectors and scales, because none of our pieces of this economy can get where we need to get alone. The last thing I would just say is economic growth is incredibly important. It's not the only thing that's important. There's other types of capital that really matter. And our ability to hold each other well in the places where we live, work, and play, our ability to embrace diversity and have conversations and do work with people who we might perceive as different from us, that type of civic engagement, that type of social connection really is at the root of a strong economy and in a strong country. So I encourage us to invest in that social capital as well.
Thank you, Danya, and for that call to action. Shannon, to you.
I think how I feel about the budget is really looking at Dave's slide 3. There was the cat, the big lion, and the little kitten. So we had really big expectations. A new government was just formed. It had to meet a lot of priorities. You know, if you prioritize everything, you can only do it your best, right? It's like giving everything 100%. So I guess my one key takeaway is we need to promote Canadian firms. We need to promote Canadian companies. A lot of this budget is towards defense, rightfully so. And a lot of our defense industry is foreign suppliers. So if we can ensure that money stays in Canada, it promotes Canadian firms, then I think we're on a good trajectory.
Thank you, Shannon. And Dave, the final word.
Yeah, there's a great film called Apollo 13. And I think it's Tom Hanks beams down, Houston, we have a problem. The interesting thing in that film is the immediate response is, what process do we need to solve this problem? It was exploded oxygen, they were running out of oxygen, but what process? And what I'm looking for here, like, first of all, Robert, there's a terrific nuance in the description you gave, and I do understand and accept that. It's not just about a signal in terms of a direction. People are concerned about the implementation, and what they don't see, what are the processes? Not just government, but government, business, civic society, academic community, to try and advance towards those issues. And I agree with Shannon, we're trying to do too much. You have to if you're gonna build something, you sequence it. You start with a floor, then you don't build a roof at the same time. And what I don't see from this government is the sequencing of the issues that they need to really focus on, involving all Canadian stakeholders in terms of trying to advance these solutions.
Thank you, Dave. Well, it's been a very engaging presentation and discussion. I hope you take these discussion points, these calls to action perspective into the coffee break, into the next panels, and into the year ahead. I'd encourage you today, in the last day, to pick up your copy of the Science Policy magazine, which is at the registration desk. And please join me in thanking our expert panel this morning.